Yeah, that won't do. How about this one? No. I'll tell you what, I'll just start the podcast. Hello, welcome back to Andrew Culture's Positivity Podcast. I've called it that because my name is Andrew Culture, and I was going to say I'm obsessed with positivity. That probably is the case, actually, but not without kind of certain bounds. But anyway, that's enough about me. I'm very honoured to have a guest with me today. So, guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, hi, Andrew. Yeah, I'm really honoured to be here, actually. I'm really chuffed that you've invited me to come on the podcast. My name's Samantha Brook, and I'm the founder of Happiness Club. And I at the moment, the main thing that I do is I write a blog about happiness.
Cool. So let's not start quite at the beginning, because everyone has a birth story, but that's probably going a bit too far back. Now, I've known you known of you, and we've talked for years and years, because we're both involved in digital marketing. But I became reacquainted with you recently as a part of visiting Toastmasters International sessions as a guest, which was lovely. And you told a story as a part of, was it part of your kind of train? Was it part of your training program?
So at Toastmasters, we regularly do speeches, and when you start Toastmasters, you choose a pathway, and the path you choose, you then do speeches along the way. I'm trying to think how to explain it. I think some of the paths, they kind of will tell you what you are supposed to talk about. I think my path, I can't even remember what my pathway is. I think it's presentation mastery, and I think I can pretty much choose what I talk about. So far, I've only done 2 speeches, and I have chosen what I spoke about for both of those speeches. And I'm doing a speech tonight, actually.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. I've joined.
Yeah.
I'm a member now, and tonight's my first proper meeting, which I'm really excited
the humorous
about.
Speech contest and the table topics contest tonight, so I've entered into both of those, which is a little bit nerve-wracking, but as we know, you have to try these things out and move out of your comfort zone. It'd be amazing if I win, and if I don't win, then it's a great learning experience.
God, everyone there's so nice.
It is an amazing group, actually.
So when I was sat there, and I'd been kind of, obviously we're recording this I had to look at the calendar then. We're recording this in October 2020, and COVID is still a thing. So we're not meeting in person, but the first event I went to, as I said, you spoke at, and I've known of your work and sort of seen what you do on social media, and everyone in digital marketing, we're all kind of aware of each other. And one of the things I like about it is none of us really see each other as competitors. We're all kind of quite matey, really, which is nice. But when you told your story at Toastmasters, it kind of feels like I'm kind of betraying the sacred trust of something private here. But
I'm a very open book.
I did kind of, listeners, I did discuss this with Sam before we started recording to check it's okay. You told me parts of your story that I was completely unaware of, and you told it in a way that made it sound almost routine. And it was that delivery that you gave it that I think made it so fascinating. So I thought I'd like to get you on the podcast just to kind of talk about your journey. So if I can choose a starting point, just to give us a kickoff. So a few years ago, you moved to Egypt.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, already that's listeners hopefully should be picking their ears up, because Egypt in the last few years has not been an easy place. So what year did you move to Egypt, and why did you move to Egypt?
I moved to Egypt in 2008. And there was lots of reasons that I moved to Egypt. I was bored and stuck in a rut in the UK, to be honest. I was single. I didn't have a partner. I didn't have any children. I think I got to the point, I'd been single for like 5 years, and I was like, what's wrong with me? I'm fat and ugly. I can't get a boyfriend, and I think my granddad died, and lots of things all kind of came to the surface at the same time. And I just decided I was going to go on holiday on my own, which is something I'd never done before. And I went to Egypt. And I've always had a fascination with Egypt since I was a child. I don't know whether you believe in stuff like this, but I'm a really big believer that I was Egyptian in a past life. And when I went to Egypt, I felt really kind of connected. I felt really at home there. So I went to Egypt, and I went on holiday to a place called Taba, which is by the Red Sea. And it's basically paradise. And I just thought, I want to live in paradise. I want to feel like I'm on holiday all of the time. And so that was one of the reasons that I moved out there. I also found the Egyptian men very attractive. And they made me feel really attractive in Egypt. I didn't feel like I was fat and ugly. I felt like I was a goddess. And I think that was, now if anyone knows me, my Facebook name in brackets is the Curvy Goddess. And I think it was partly living in Egypt that kind of made me really embrace my curves and start to really love myself as I am. So that was another reason that I moved there.
There's two really interesting things here already for me. I mean, I've spoken to several other people on this podcast who have essentially just made big decisions, made what we've called almost patronizingly brave decisions. But deciding to up sticks and move when somewhere has made a big impression on you, that's not an insignificant thing. I think anyone who's prepared to go anywhere sort of outside of probably even just 100 miles of where they grew up, that's a big thing. The second thing that's really interesting to me there is, because we grow up in a bubble surrounded by people who have views that aren't that different to ours, or our parents and family and everyone sort of is magnetically drawn to people who aren't massively different, that the idea of what's attractive and what beauty can be perceived as can actually be a very narrow thing, and it can be almost kind of focused on just one geographical location. So it's kind of cool that you went, Egypt's not close. It must be thousands of miles away, and you suddenly realised that your perception of yourself had changed as well. So, I mean, what happened? Were you literally sat by a pool and went, "That's it, I'm not going home"? I mean, there must have been some organisation.
Yeah, it took me about 6 months to arrange things. I went back on 2 holidays. I mean, everyone says to me, "Oh, well, you were so brave." And to be honest, I always think and say there's a fine line between brave and stupid. I
wish I knew where it was.
My
life would have been simpler if I'd known that.
I did take risks, and some of those risks didn't pay off. When I went on my second holiday, I met a guy who I started dating, and he was probably the push that made me move out there. And people said to me, "Oh, I can't believe you're moving on to the other side of the world for a guy." And I kept saying, "I'm not doing it for the guy. He's kind of like the final push that I need." And as it happened, he dumped me after about 2 weeks of being there.
No.
And I hardly saw him when I got there. He was like, clearly took him 2 weeks to pluck up the courage to tell me actually he wasn't, I wasn't the one for him. And I was devastated for about 2 weeks. But actually, I thought, well, this is an adventure, and I'm going to embrace it, and I'm going to give it 6 months. And if after 6 months I haven't enjoyed it, I'm going to go home. And if not, I'm going to stay. And I stayed for 3 years.
3 years. So I'm just doing sort of date maths in my head here. So you went out 2008. So you were there for 3 years, and something quite significant happened in Egypt in 2011. Yeah. Were you still there for that significant thing?
I took part in the Egyptian revolution. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No, I didn't know that.
Talking of taking risks.
I knew that you were in Egypt for some time. I hadn't actually realised you were part of the Egyptian revolution. I mean, my God, that could be a 6-hour-long podcast in its own right. But let's just touch on it for now. So, I mean, what the hell?
Yeah, well,
just what? I don't even know where to start.
So before I went to Egypt, I've been really interested in spiritual development and personal development for a long time. And just before I went to Egypt, And while I was still trying to find how I could get there, I had this, vision. I want to go to Egypt, but I don't know how. I went on a Tony Robbins course.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
and so we were, setting goals and.
Sorry, just for listeners, can you just
Yeah,
give us
sorry.
who is
So
Tony
yeah, people
Robbins?
often ask me that. I always say he is probably the world's leading life coach. Is that a good way to describe
No,
him?
that's absolutely perfect. I would agree with that
Yeah,
entirely. Yeah.
he's a pretty interesting, dynamic character. And so, as part of my vision of going to Egypt, I set myself kind of intentions and goals of what I wanted to achieve while I was there. And one of the things that really struck me when I was on holiday, sorry, my cat's coming on the computer, I should have shut him out.
Sorry, cats are very welcome in this podcast.
Actually, my cats came from Egypt, but that's another story.
Oh my God. Okay. So today in part 1 of Sam's story.
Yes, so where was I? Yes, so when I went on
You went to a Tony
holiday,
Robbins. Yeah.
I really, one of the things I felt really strongly about was I could see this real divide between the rich people and poor people in Egypt, and there was so much poverty there, and it really struck a chord with me. And I remember saying to two of my friends that when I was on holiday there, one of them already lived there, and one was somebody that I'd met there, and we'd then consequently gone on a few holidays together. And I was saying, I really want to do something to change this. And they were joking and saying, oh, in 3 years' time, we're going to see you on TV protesting outside, the barracks palace or something. And little did we know that kind of was almost what happened. So yeah, I mean, when I heard about the revolution on the news, the first day of while I was in Egypt on the first day of the protests, and I just thought I have to be there. And so in Egypt, the weekends were Fridays and Saturdays, and there was this day of protests planned on the Friday.
Was it after Friday prayers?
I think it was actually, yes, it was after the Friday prayers, and it was, I think it got dubbed Angry Friday in the end, but that was the first. I can't remember if I went on one of the other days as well, but I think I did go on another day before that. And yeah, on the Angry Friday, I got caught in tear gas, which is just, words can't even describe what a horrific experience that was.
I can't imagine. I mean, when we think of protesting in this country, protesting is important, and we're very angry when we protest, and it's not an insignificant thing. But British people, I think, with protesting, we almost have a nice day out of it.
Yeah.
Whoever you see protesting, with the exception of people like the far right, who I'm not going to give more than a second of even airtime to, it's a bit jolly mostly. And even if the police do come in, there have been exceptions, of course. Anyone listening to this, I'm not saying that horrific things haven't happened. But on the whole, if you can go out, wave a placard around, and you're British in the UK or whatever nationality you're in the UK, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah.
Whereas in other countries, I don't know what Egypt was like then, but I grew up in the 80s. Well, I'm still growing up now, but I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I vividly remember things like Tiananmen Square. So well, you got tear gassed, so clearly it wasn't a safe.
Yeah, I mean,
a safe place.
I think compared to a lot of the other revolutions in the Arab Spring, we were really lucky in Egypt, and there was tough times. Some of my friends got shot, some of my friends got imprisoned. I got caught in tear gas. I got detained by the army at gunpoint. There were a couple of days that were really scary, and there was some really kind of nasty shit that went down. But actually, this is so typical of the Egyptian people. Most of it was like a festival, and that just made me laugh.
Yeah, but that's kind of cool. I mean, that's
so funny.
That's one of the cool things. I said I'm trying not to make light of protesting here, but that is kind of what I was trying to get across about my experience of witnessing protests in this country, is that there is a party atmosphere because there's a lot of people with a common goal in one place, and that only happens so many times in our lives. Music festivals.
It's one of them. Sorry, carry on.
No, that was it. And
Mm.
I was about to say what you were about to say.
I
I
was going
think.
to
Go
say it
on,
was
go
one of
for it.
the best times of my life because I just had this purpose. I went out every day and I had so much energy. I felt like I had this purpose. I was, during the day, I was protesting with my Egyptian friends and I was staying at their flat because they had a flat close to Tahrir Square. And and I'd come home late at night. Bearing in mind, I'm such a lightweight, I normally have to be asleep, but my brain switches off at 4 o'clock and I have to be asleep between 9 and 10. But I was coming home late at night and then writing blogs about it. And I was writing for
Wow.
africanews.com and I was writing on my own personal blog. And I just felt like in some way, I kept thinking, what difference can I make? I'm just one person.
You have. I didn't know that you'd written about it.
Mm,
That by itself, you have become a part of
yeah,
history. Just being there is just mind melting enough, but actually documenting it, potentially you are the person who has created records that people could be studying
yeah.
for
I mean, I think
hundreds of
obviously a lot
years,
of people
forever.
have written about it, and I was also lucky because you know I was a small fish, so I was under the radar. But there was other journalists that were getting captured and tortured, and I did write one in particular blog post on the last day of the revolution. I was interviewing people, and somebody came up to me, and he couldn't speak any English. My friends were translating, and he said, oh, I want to share my story. And he'd been a member of the secret police or something, or secret service or something like
What?
that. And he wanted to share his story off the record, wouldn't give his real name. And I met up with him a few days later. And he insisted on me paying him, which is such an Egyptian thing to do. But it was
Or
such
is
a good story. I didn't give him a lot of money. I gave him 200 Egyptian pounds, which is like 20 English pounds, which is a lot of money to them. But his story was just so incredible. And I wish that it could have got some traction. I did try and kind of sell it to the press in the UK, but there was no evidence for it. And
these things, the way that, sorry listeners, we both work in content, so there's inevitably going to be content discussion in this podcast, but that kind of, I don't want to call it content because that removes so much of its potency in this case, I think. But that's the sort of thing that even if it doesn't get placed now, you could find in 10 years time.
yeah, you just
The
don't know,
fact
do
that
you?
you've got a first hand account,
Mm,
that's the sort of thing that I would keep very safely locked away and
yeah.
secure and kind of sit on it because it's just
Mm,
what an incredible story. So
um,
I have a few
mm,
questions and you can tell me to do one and not answer if you wish. Oh, sorry, I've over egged that now. I'm not gonna. This isn't that. It's not that kind of podcast. The one of the things I'm wondering is when you were in a crowd, and these must have been large
mm.
crowds. Were you obviously not Egyptian? I don't really know how to phrase this
No,
right,
that's
but I
really
mean,
interesting
were
point
you
actually,
conspicuous?
because they were very suspicious of foreigners because there was conspiracy theories going around, as you can imagine, that that America and the UK were sending in spies and that it was all
Well, unfortunately, kind of looking back at history,
yeah,
I can see why they
exactly.
were.
And that it was all contrived by America and Israel and all sorts of things. And actually, one of the things that was really interesting, kind of slightly digressing here, was after Angry Friday, Mubarak's kind of had two, what's the word I'm looking for? Two strategies. And one of them was that he took all the police off the streets because he wanted anarchy. And so he took the police off the streets and they let all of the dangerous criminals out of prison and gave them guns and let them loose with these guns. And so he was basically saying, look, if you haven't got me and you haven't got the police, then you're fucked, basically.
That's I didn't know any of
Yeah.
this. I mean, obviously the version of news that we receive through the mainstream here is I don't believe it's as politically swaying as some people might believe, but clearly it is. Well, ignore the
Mm.
newspapers, but we've basically got the BBC, which that we could argue long into the night about whether it has political bias or not. But we have this would have been a time before Al Jazeera had gained as much popularity as it has
Mm.
now in the UK. So you're telling me things that I am completely ignorant of. I had absolutely no idea that was
Yeah, I mean,
happening.
we were watching the news in Egypt, so we were watching Al Jazeera, we were watching BBC, I think we were watching CNN, and what was portrayed, especially on BBC and CNN, not so much on Al Jazeera, was just not what was happening in reality, which was another reason that I wanted to write my blog post.
So what's the let's unpack a little bit. We sort of I think a lot of people in the UK took very arrogantly took it for granted that, oh, there's a revolution, therefore there must be bad person needs to be got rid of. And I think rather stupidly we don't necessarily look much
No.
further into it than that. So what was the problem the people had with Mubarak, with the
So, for
president?
example, the at the time, the average earnings in Egypt, I can't remember, it's on my blog, it's something ridiculous, like people, I think it was something like, I'm trying to remember, something like 80% of the population were earning like $2 a day, and 40% were earning $1 a day. I can't remember the exact figures, but like I say, it is on my blog. So that's
Okay, so
one
let's
thing.
let's let's just smash another preconception that I think the Western world has, because it's a cliche that people say, "Oh yeah, well, they only earn $1 a day, but cost of living is much
Mm.
cheaper," which I've always thought must be
Yeah, I mean,
bullshit.
when you go around Cairo, the poverty is, yeah, I can't even think of the words to say, but there's such a big gap between the rich people and the poor people. There's so much poverty. Um, yeah, I mean, I was really lucky. I had a reasonable amount of money while I was there. Most of my Egyptian friends, not all of them, but a lot of them had a reasonable amount of money. We used to go to a restaurant and somebody would take our keys of the car and go and park the car for us, so that the people that were kind of middle class, and there's a lot of talk about class in Egypt, did have a really good life, but at the expense of so much poverty elsewhere.
Mm.
But yeah, it's difficult to put it into words, really, how to explain the poverty. And a lot of it is also, obviously people, it's a lot of the people there are, people still walk around in galabayas, and
What's a
a
galabaya?
galabaya is like men and women wear the galabayas. They're kind of like a dress, like
Okay,
traditional kind of Egyptian, Middle Eastern. Trying to think how to describe it. Like I don't know, like a tunic, I suppose, like a really long tunic with sleeves
okay.
usually. And people, yeah, it's just so really difficult to explain. I mean, I used to, when I lived, because I lived for a year and a half by the Red Sea, and then I lived for a year and a half in Cairo. And in Cairo, it, yeah, like you can hear that I'm trying to think of words to explain it, but we used to walk to the end of my road, and there'd be stalls of people selling oranges, and people walking around with donkeys and wearing galabayas. It's like something from,
So that's stepping back in
yeah.
time,
So
almost.
it's really is another world completely. And I think the other reason, there were lots of reasons for the revolution. I think the tipping point was that there was an activist that got beaten up and tortured by the police, and I think that was the tipping point from memory. And I think the Egyptian people just got to the point where they said, we're quite a passive, placid, laid back people, but you've pushed us too far now, and we're not taking this shit anymore.
Okay, so it's a general thing. I'm trying to remember. I've got a screen open here. I'm desperately trying to very quietly Google
Mm.
things, but I'm trying to figure out whether Mubarak was just an out and out
Yeah, he was.
dictator, or
I'm pretty sure he was a dictator. 99%
so he'd
sure.
been in power for
Yeah.
quite a
Oh
long
yeah, definitely.
time.
Yeah, and I can't remember whether they didn't have any elections or if the elections were fixed. But yeah, there wasn't much chance for any oppositions. But I think one of the downfalls of the revolution was that uh, there wasn't really anyone suitable to take over.
No, because what happened as I understand it, is I'm just seeing that there's tons of research. You just Google, but as I think I'm going to start saying on this podcast, if you Google for things, bear in mind the motivation of the people giving you
Oh
the
yeah,
information.
definitely.
So yeah, Google it, have a look around. But even I'm looking on the wiki page for the Egyptian Revolution, and it's not totally neutral.
No,
So
unfortunately.
research it, but where that filter of who is providing this
Mm,
information and what is their motivation. So he stepped down, which is a ridiculously polite way of putting it, but he stopped being president, and the army took over
mm.
by the look of it, which wouldn't necessarily strike me as a positive thing. But I could be wrong. I mean, again, I don't have the experience. So what did it? Were you still in Egypt when he stepped
Yeah,
down?
so when the army took over, I think, so this was something I was going to say just now. The other strategy that Mubarak took was that he did, I have heard this unofficially, I don't know if it's true. I've heard that he instructed the army to fire on the protesters. The thing is with the army in Egypt is that they have to do national service. I think it's the oldest son or something like that.
Oh, I didn't
And
know that.
so the army are the people.
Mm.
And so they,
They're not sort of professional soldiers
no,
as
I mean,
such.
there
Then,
obviously are
well, they are.
professional, but a lot of them are, what you consider to be the people, and they refused to fire on the protesters. Like I say, whether that's actually true or not, I don't know. That's what I heard. And I mean, I remember my friend calling me and saying, "Are you in Egypt? Where are you?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm in Tahrir Square." And he was like, "Get out of there! You're going to get fired on."
That's the thing. It's not. It's kind of when you were telling. I knew you were there, and I didn't know you were there for the revolution. I kind of, I sort of had a guess at that, but it's one thing, kind of knowing people were in a country. I mean, I've spoken to American friends about what's happening with the IRA in the
Mm,
80s, and they're like, "Oh my God, you were like in the country." I was I was in the country because I was a
yeah.
child, and it was in London, which is from where I'm sitting, is about 80 miles away. But I wasn't there. I wasn't in the hotspot. I wasn't in the hub,
Mm,
fortunately, and very fortunately. So I didn't want to assume that just because you were in Egypt, that you were actually not just in Cairo, you were in Tahrir
mm,
Square. You were in the middle. And I'm looking at a picture of it
mm.
here, and it's insane. Okay, so the military took
Yeah,
over.
so
They
initially the military took over. There was kind of tanks everywhere and army everywhere. Um, I think things went downhill after the revolution. I think the energy in Cairo changed. There was a lot of anger. I mean, there was obviously a lot of poverty. I think sometimes I think, was it a good thing? And when I talk to my Egyptian friends, there's very mixed responses to that. And I think the thing is, a lot of the time with these kind of things have to get worse before they get better. And then
that's
obviously
the thing. If you
the Muslim Brotherhood took over, and then there was kind of another revolution and what was dubbed as a military coup, and the army took over again. And as far as I understand it, and I mean, I'm not. People always say to me, "Oh, you're so political." I don't understand politics. And when people first used to say to me I was political, I was like, "What? I don't know anything about politics. I'm very passionate about what I believe in, and apparently that makes me political."
that is, well, to my mind, that is, you can't, nobody can be apolitical. No one cannot be political
Mm.
because everyone has opinions. But sorry, I
No, I
interrupted. Go on.
I feel like I have to make a caveat that everything I say is from a point of view that I know nothing about politics. From so then this, I think the current president or prime minister, whatever you call it in Egypt, is Sisi, who was like the army general. Now I'm probably skating on really thin ice here because apparently he's even worse than Mubarak. And
There's always a bigger
if I was
bastard,
doing
isn't there?
this in Egypt, I probably wouldn't be safe to say this. And I do intend to go back to Egypt on holiday. So, but anyway, I'm digressing. But last time I went to Egypt, or when I went a couple of years ago, because I still go quite regularly, I was kind of asking around, and the people were scared to talk about it. But they basically said that CC was worse, and that anyone that said anything was getting captured and tortured. I think there was a French student who was blogging about CC and about the regime, and he went missing, and then his body turned up a few weeks later, tortured and beaten. And they said the story was that he'd been got by like a gang of robbers, but everyone basically knew that it was down to the regime. So yeah, I who knows what the outcome is going to be, and I don't know what the current situation is. I did see one of my friends posted on Facebook the other day, who is Egyptian, who lives in Australia, and she'd seen on Al Jazeera that there were protests going on in Cairo a couple of weeks ago, but there was a news blackout in Egypt, and her Egyptian friends were saying, "Oh, we don't know anything about it." I asked one of my Egyptian friends about it, and she was quite dismissive of it, and she said she didn't know anything about it, and that she didn't think there was any trouble. So I don't.
So it's just a friend in Egypt
This is a
saying
friend
that.
in Egypt, yeah. So I don't quite know what happened there.
Yeah, it's such a struggle to understand these things, because the military being in power, the gut reaction is that's bad. It's people with guns running the country, but the reality is that in this country, the state and sorry, phone ringing, the state and the military aren't that separate, whereas in a lot of countries they are. They're two quite different entities. Okay, so just rise to not talked about what I really intended to talk about for this, but this is endlessly fascinating. So I don't want to kind of shortcut the story too much, but you came back to the UK.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking to me from the other side of Ipswich. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I'm in Ipswich. Yeah.
You're in Ipswich. Yeah. So what led you to leave? What made? How did you make that decision?
So
not why did you make that decision, but how
yeah,
did
I
you
think
make that decision?
things did deteriorate in Egypt after that, as I say, and in Cairo, and I felt there was a lot of anger, a lot of negativity. I was battling with depression throughout my time in Egypt, and I think my depression probably got to an all-time low. I had no money. I was basically sitting in my flat eating junk food, drinking wine and smoking cigarettes. And the funny thing is back then in Egypt, you could order all of those things over the phone. So I was phoning up and ordering a McDonald's or a Pizza Hut. Obviously, with these days in England, you can order a McDonald's on delivery, but it's quite a recent thing. But I used to think that was really novel. And then I was phoning up and ordering chocolate and cigarettes in my broken Arabic, to the point that they knew it was me, and they would say, "Oh, you want your big bar of Galaxy and your packet of cigarettes," before I'd even said anything.
That's a bit of a red flag.
Yeah, and so yeah, and those of you who know my story know that I'm estranged from my family, but my mum and dad, I think, knew I was in a bad place, and basically they rescued me. So my mum had moved to Ipswich while I was living in Egypt, and so that's how I ended up in Ipswich. My mum basically took pity on me, paid for my flight home, and let me live with her, helped me get back on my feet. Yeah, so that's how I was getting really angry myself. It was quite funny. I got into a couple of altercations when I thought to myself, yeah, this really isn't good. I really need to do something about this. I think there was one guy on the metro, which is like their tube, that I kind of pushed off pushed off the tube.
You pushed him
Well,
off the
what happened
tube.
was they are so disrespectful to women. And so, not all of them, the thing is with Egyptians, I always say Egyptians are like, they're either really, really nice or they're really, really nasty people. There's no kind of in between. And I was really lucky that I met so many amazing people there, but some of the people were just really nasty people. And this guy, I was trying to get off and he pushed past me before I could get off. And I was so angry, I just pushed him and he fell backwards. But luckily he didn't actually fall over. He just kind of stumbled a bit.
Unfortunately, didn't land on the tracks.
Just on the platform.
Wow.
And then there was an incident where I left a job, not on particularly good terms, and I went to get my money, and they didn't pay me the full amount, and they were coming up with all these bullshit reasons about how I never got to work on time, and so they were deducting my pay, and I just lost it and started going, this company's a fucking joke.
To be fair, it doesn't sound like the best company in the world.
And I just like really lost it. And so after I had these couple of angry outbursts, I thought to myself, I think I've got a few anger issues that I need to iron out.
Do you know, I've never known you, and don't take this wrong, I've never known you like closely, but I've certainly spoken to you and interacted with you and been in the same room with you many times. I've never seen you as an angry person.
No.
So I can see kind of, even just from how well I know, I can see that that's possibly a little out of character for you to be shoving people over.
I think
my
boyfriend would probably disagree with you on that one.
I'm not angry, I'm passionate.
I think as I've got older, I've become a lot more laid back and a lot less angry. But I'm one of those people that it takes quite a lot for me to get angry. But when I do, I have got quite a nasty temper, unfortunately, which is something I'm working on.
I'm fascinated by it, because one of the things I've found challenging, I don't want to say struggled with, one of the things I found challenging during lockdown, and this podcast isn't meant to be about me, but I'm a musician and I make big, loud noises. I mean, like shockingly big, loud noises, either by myself or in bands with other people. And I haven't been able to do that since March. And it's not that I have any sort of particular innate anger, but having missed that outlet to like make big, loud noises, I think I've realized that I've possibly been managing my anger with like little micro outbursts that don't necessarily, hopefully, don't cause too much damage to anything other than kind of ears. But yeah, I identify with the fact that just letting it get to a certain point, it's not a healthy thing. Well, not for me. I'm being subjective. So I just realized how long we've been talking, and God, it's been absolutely fascinating. And one of the things I like about this podcast, it never takes the path I think it's going to. But the reason I originally wanted to speak to you, Sam, is because one of the things you've done since coming back to the UK is you've started something called the Happiness Club. And I think it's a really cool and interesting idea. Before I tell the listeners what it is, have you got like an elevator pitch for it?
So Happiness Club is about me learning to be happy and hopefully inspiring others to learn to be happy by sharing my experiences. For a while I was saying I've learned to be happy and I'm like teaching other people what I've learned, and then I had kind of had a big wake up call that I haven't learned to be happy. It's an ongoing learning experience, and when I first realized that actually I'm not 100% happy, I kind of had this whole thing, how can I teach other people to be happy when I'm not happy myself? And then actually one of my friends said to me, actually you're exactly the right person, because you're living it, you're breathing it, you're experiencing it, and we can relate to you because you're real.
Sometimes I think when I read, I'm kind of fascinated is the wrong word, but I'm invested in mindfulness. I think that's probably a better way of putting it. But some books I read or some blogs I read, if someone portrays themselves as, hey, I'm there, come on, catch up, I'm like, fuck off.
Exactly. Yeah.
It doesn't sort of quite feel like someone who I want to listen to. So no, I can see that it's the journey, isn't it? It's the journey that's the thing, not the destination.
Exactly.
Which if a taxi driver ever says that to you, you've got the wrong taxi. Oh, look at that joke! I did a joke in a podcast. How bizarre. Okay, so how can I don't want to kind of go too deep into the Happiness Club now, because I think it kind of probably deserves, well, it does deserve its own deeper discussion. So if we wrap up, if you can let people know how to find out more about the Happiness Club, and if you're okay with it, I'd like to publish some links in the show notes to some of the things you wrote while you're in Egypt, because I want to read them apart from anything else. So I'll include links, but do you want to just tell people how to find the Happiness Club?
So the website is happiness-club.co.uk.
Cool. And what do you expect? What can people find there, and what do you expect of people?
So the main thing is that at the moment, because I'm working full time, I don't have enough time as much time as I would like to spend on the Happiness Club. So the main thing I'm doing is keeping my blog. I'm up. Well, I say up to date. I'm probably publishing a blog post every month or two. So
it's consistency is more important than frequency.
Yeah, I would love if people signed up to receive an update, to receive an email when I publish a new blog post. I've also recently published a free PDF, which is, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's essentially happiness tips for lockdown.
Cool.
And
that sounds
there's
brilliant.
a link to that on my Facebook page. There's a pinned post. The Facebook page is Happiness Club International, I think. And I'm on Instagram, Sam_Brook_happiness_club. I think I should have thought about this before I came on. Yeah, so
I'm sure when I was a kid, underscores didn't exist.
Sorry.
I'm sure when I was a kid, underscores didn't exist.
So yeah, I'm at the moment, like I say, I'm writing my blog posts. I'm sharing my experience. I occasionally do an odd video as well on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and yeah, at some point I'd like to do some online courses, and that's something that I'm working on. But I'm just taking one step at a time at the moment. Like I said, I'm working full time, and that's my priority.
It sounds to me like you're winning, Sam. It sounds very positive.
You.
It's been an absolute joy to speak to you, and I don't really know where to go next with this. I think there's clearly other things that we could kind of dig into. So listeners, if you'd like to hear more from Sam, first of all, go have a look at Happiness Club, and secondly, let us know what more you'd like to know. So Sam, thank you very much. I'm going to say goodbye now. Would you like to say goodbye?
Yeah, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks, Andrew. It's been great.
Well, that's the end of this one. So what do you think? Do you like it? I hope so. This is the kind of bit that you might be able to tell I just use the same bit every time because, well, it's not so much lazy as efficient, but this is the bit where I say smash the like button or stab at it, or actually just stroke it gently. Be nice. Yeah, why would you be so aggressive? But please like, please subscribe, and please rank, rate, tell everyone. These kind of things, I assume they matter. Everyone else says them. But there you go. So endeth this episode of the Andrew Culture podcast. If you want to know more about what I get up to, go have a look at andrewculture.com because I won't bore you with it here. Anyway, until the next time, keep it cool, stand in a dry place, or do what you want. I'm not your boss. Bye.
We don't know for sure. I think weather can be changeable.